Hi, I'm David and welcome to LeisureBit, and today we're going to be installing the long-awaited Victron Orion XS, which is a 50 amp battery to battery charger, and we're going to remove the two that are already installed, which is an Orion, the previous generation one, and also the originally installed B2B. This then gives a single solution which will make charging much simpler because you've got one brain controlling it. It'll also connect via VE bus into other solutions as well as Bluetooth. That not only saves weight, but it massively simplifies things, and the sizing also is much smaller. And as you know, in a camper van, space is premium. This takes up a heck of a lot less space. It's 5.2 times heavier than the Orion XS, and you can't half feel the difference. And the Orion XS outputs 1.6 times more power. 30 amp, 50 amp. Shows how technology's moved on. It's much smaller than this. It produces a lot less heat than this. It's 1.6 times bigger power output, so that's 50 amps rather than 30 amps. And it's 5.2 times lighter. You could have 5 of them and it'll still come in lighter. And comparing it to the factory installed one, this came in at 399 grams versus 330 grams on the XS. And this gives only half the power output, so 69 grams heavier and half the power output. By removing these two and replacing with the Orion XS, it's almost 2 kilograms of weight saved, and I'm getting a better output, more power than these two combined. Two become one. This is the job for today, so let's get cracking. The Orion XS was announced last year and it's taken quite a lot of time to get it shipped. I bought mine from Off-Grid Power Solutions. I'll pop a link in the description. This video isn't sponsored in any way at all like the rest of our videos. I've purchased this myself. I'm going to install it in the van because I believe it's something that not only simplifies the electrics. Let's do a weigh-in now. So first up, we've got the Schaudt, and that's weighing in at 398 grams. Let's have a look and see what the big fella weighed. So now the Orion 30 amp, let's move that back a little bit, which is weighing in at 1731, and the two together then come in at 2.129 kilos. So quite a bit of weight there. And the weight of the Orion XS is 330 grams. Saves weight, saves space, but also gives more control and should look after the battery better as well. Because you spend a lot of money on a lithium battery and you don't want to reduce the lifespan by not having the proper charging in place. The solution I previously put in bridged a gap where it increased the charge current from, typically out of the originally installed one, get between 15 and maybe 21 amps out of it, and it's a 25 amp B2B. So I'm hoping with this one we pull somewhere near the full 50 amps. Worth noting that you can't use the converter connection for this because it exceeds the current limit. This is so much more efficient than the previous one. If any of you have got one of the original Orions, with the big heatsink on, you will find that they get quite warm at full load and then they start to scale back the power. So it starts off at 30 amps or thereabouts and it'll scale back as it gets warm, and you really need to put a fan on them if you want to get maximum output for them. Hoping this one, you can see there's no heatsink on the back of this one, so I'm hoping this one actually doesn't need a fan and basically sorts all issues out in one. The other thing I noticed was because there's two B2Bs charging the battery, the logic within them can get a bit confused because one will raise the voltage, the other will think the battery voltage is raised. Not such a problem as you're charging up, so in terms of cracking the problem of charging it, absolutely fine. But what was happening was when it got full, you'd get a little bit of a messing around going on between the two of them, because obviously neither one really talks to each other, whereas this one is a single controller then, and through the Victron VE bus and through the Victron network will talk to the other components. It also has a low temperature charge shut off as well, which is super helpful because you shouldn't rely on the BMS to do everything, and it will stop the charge current below a certain temperature. One of the useful features on the XS, which wasn't on the TR Smart, is the ability to change the input and output current. So if you've got a setup that you've maybe put in for now, and in my example I've got 16mm cable running from the vehicle battery back to where I'm connecting it in, which is about a 6 meter length, so it's slightly over the recommended run for 16mm squared cable. So what I'm going to do, because I can see the voltage drop across that when running it, and it is very borderline, it's not far out, but I would personally far rather upgrade my cable to 25mm back to the vehicle battery, less concerned about the short runs to the leisure battery because they're within the same space, so we're not going to get a massive voltage drop there. The longer the cable, the bigger the voltage drop, so the longer you're running, the more consideration. We don't really want heat build up, as I've run that cable in conduit as well. So my example there, might want to reduce the current down to either 30 or 40 amps until we've upgraded that cable, just so that nothing warms up. If you're in a position where you're, like me there, in progress of doing some upgrades on it, you could potentially lower the power at that point. A brilliant new feature there. We'll take a look at those things as we go through the video, but I think now we'd better get cracking and get it installed. In terms of how we connect it up, it's fairly straightforward. We've got an input, a ground and an output. The input is the positive feed, which comes from the vehicle battery through an appropriate fuse. I've decided to use a 60 amp fuse, which gives a bit of headroom, which is the same one I fitted to the original because of the improved efficiency. That then runs through cabling that comes back to the back of the van where my leisure battery is, and I'm going to put an additional fuse on just for some added protection, and then feed it through a cut-off switch so I can isolate the vehicle side, because sometimes you want to work on the vehicle and you don't want any connections coming back, similar to what I've done with the battery maintainer. The second wire, so the ground, then connects to the ground, which is going to connect into my negative bus bar. I'll pop a little diagram on the screen just so you can see how it's connected up. There's then a connection from the bus bar to the vehicle chassis, and I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure you get a good connection there and put it in a sensible place, because you're effectively going to have over 50 amp return path running through there, so it needs to be a good connection in a good place for it to work properly and not cause an issue. The final connection, which is the output, connects to the leisure battery via a fuse, and again I'm going to use a 60 amp. What I'm also going to do is keep a couple of spare fuses in the van just in case, top tip there, and then if anything ever happens when we're out on the road, then there's fuses to replace should there be an issue. Fingers crossed though, we shouldn't have any issues with it. There's also a bridging connector that comes with the Orion, and what we need to do for this setup is we're going to remove the bridge from the connector, same as we did on the other Orion, and then connect the D+ connection to the high. That basically sets it up so that when the engine's running, it enables the Orion XS, and that then saves you having a situation where anything weird happens and it starts charging when the engine and the alternator aren't running. We've got a smart alternator on ours, so it makes perfect sense to connect through this, and you do get some peculiar things happening with smart alternators, as they're designed not to be given a constant charge and only charging when needed. The reason for that is to improve the environment by reducing emissions from the vehicle and not using power when it's not needed. However, it does cause a little bit of a challenge, of course, in the van, as sometimes you actually want to charge things up, but you can adjust the settings to cover that. There's also a smart alternator setting which you can set on the XS within the settings menu. If you don't have or don't want to use the D+ connection, as I personally do, because it just gives that assurance that the engine's running and it's not using voltage sensing, you can of course use the built-in engine running detection, which works on voltage changes to pick that up. I'm going to do some further work on my van 12-volt electrical system, so I've not worried too much about particularly where I've installed it for this point, although I've tried to put it somewhere near where it would likely end up. You'd probably install yours slightly differently, so don't worry too much about the specific positioning, and different vans have different positions and different useful spaces to install it. Do make sure there's a little bit of space around it, just that it does keep cool and get some airflow through it, even though it doesn't generate the same amount of heat as this bad boy did. What it's worth doing still though is making sure it's got adequate ventilation. I'm not going to show you me removing all of the old equipment. It's not particularly interesting, or generally isn't unless anything goes wrong. So what we'll do is we will pick up in a moment, and at that point we'll run through what we've actually removed and what we've installed. But as you can see, this is out and this is out. So let's take a look now and see what we're left with, and also see the new one installed. We'll walk through that. So let's take a look at what we've got installed and what we're going to remove. So firstly, there's the original B2B. We'll be removing that one, and we've got the various connections coming in, including the D+ sense, which we'll be using also. These two breakers are for my battery maintainer, which you can probably just see down at the bottom there, if my fingers aren't in the way. Temporarily, I've just popped a Serbo GX on there, as I've been doing a little bit of work to understand whether the Serbo GX is a good option for me, and so far so good. And it's another thing that will plug into the Serbo once we get that installed. We'll probably move this and install it somewhere else, because I've temporarily just stuck it on top of the BCA unit there. Secondly, we'll also remove the Orion TR Smart 121230. That one, what you see there, you can see its heatsink and the side of it. And if we pop this one beside it, you can see the difference in size there. Look at that. The thickness on this one's smaller than the heatsink on the Orion. Wow. Let's have a look at the install now, and we'll work back from the Orion. So we've got the positive input wire there, that feeds along behind there and connects up to that, which is the input isolator. That then heads back along that way, which then connects under the van. At the moment via a 16mm, but I am going to upgrade that to a 25mm, and that connects then through a 60 amp fuse to the vehicle battery. The second connection, the output, which is the other red one, feeds back along here and then connects via this isolator to the Leisure battery, and that then has a 60 amp fuse which feeds back to the Leisure battery, which in my case is a Roma 460 amp hour. We then have the black cable, which is the negative, which connects back to the negative bus bar. So there's my negative bus bar, see the cable going in there, and also the feedback to the Leisure battery. And then the negative bus bar connects onwards to the vehicle chassis. This is how I've temporarily set it up, but I am going to do some further work on it. If I want to isolate, I can simply turn those off, but there's the ability to isolate the circuit. Stay tuned if you want to see what we're up to with the electrics. This is just temporary, just so that I could check it out, make sure everything works before we actually knit it into the new system. Good results so far. I've tested it for a few hundred miles. Went down to the NEC show. You've probably seen the videos on that. If not, check them out. And worked absolutely perfectly, charged really well, and it's much simpler, and you know what's going on. You can keep an eye on it in the app, and you've not got that conflict I was getting between the two when it reaches full charge. Definitely getting more power through as well, which is spot on. One of the things that was a little bit of a disappointment with the Orion XS is it comes with the VE bus connection, so you can connect it up into the Serbo or any other VE bus compatible devices, and It doesn't really do anything at this point. On the Victron sheet though, it does say coming in March 24, there will be enabling that capability, and then hopefully we can see the information on the servo screen and get improved information within the app. So looking forward to that. We'll do a follow-on video to cover that off at a later point and also go into a bit more detail of how we're getting on. So far though, it's working really well for me. It's made a big difference. It's reduced weight, it's saved space, it's easier to configure and control, there's more options there. The WA121525 B2B actually on the lithium setting has a slightly higher voltage than my battery would particularly like, and that wants 14.2, not 14.4 volts, which this outputs. Generally much better. So we've got the exact matched profile for the battery as well. So it should help keep the battery in good condition for longer as well. You spend a lot of money on these things, so it's worth actually having it right. The setup with the two B2Bs actually did a great job and it filled a void. At the time the XS wasn't available and I thought, what a cracking solution. When it was available with the extra features, I thought it was well worth upgrading. If anyone is after a 30 amp one of these, because they are still a good unit and some people don't want 50 amps or want to spend the extra money on the XS, get in touch, because that one is up for sale now, because it might as well go to a good home. You will have noticed as well that you don't see any inline breakers within this circuit, which good reason for taking that one out. I have had some problem with it. I will cover that in a separate video. Are you thinking of upgrading to the XS? Maybe you've already upgraded. Would you do anything differently? Are you sticking with your original Orion? Have you got a different setup altogether? I'd love to hear about it. And if you've got any tips, suggestions, or anything you do differently, do let us know. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful, and I'll catch you for the next bit.